There are some problems here. Sorry, big time.
I'm so upset. Oh my God.
Welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur. Trita Parsi joins me. Dr. Parsi is co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute. And make sure you check out his Substack as well. Trita, welcome.
Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
No problem. All right, obviously we're gonna discuss Iran in a second and the war, and we're gonna get Trita's point of view on whether we're even negotiating with the Iranians or if all of this is just entirely made up by Donald Trump. What's gonna come next? We will also talk about some of the fights that have been going around on the issue of whether Morocco immigrant controversy was started by Israel. There's a lot of back and forth on that. Then the gathering of Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Joe Kent, and Thomas Massie at Tucker Carlson's place. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Is it partly good, partly bad? And we've got a lot more. And then look, later in the program, in the second hour, there's folks who just are trying to confuse you as to what people stand for. You know, are the only two options in the Democratic Party the establishment and DSA? I think the answer is obviously no, but we're gonna talk about the nuances here, which apparently confounds mainstream media. They're like, what is nuance? We do not know. I don't know why I gave him an accent, but it sounded funny. Okay, so, but having said all that, obviously the war is the biggest issue on the table, so let's get started.
We're also asked by Iran, very strongly actually. They said we'd like to make a deal. Now, you know, I don't know what they say because a lot of times they'll say that to me and then they'll go out and say, we don't know what he's talking about. Obviously, they don't want to be attacked. And they knew the extent of the attack because they saw it forming. We had an attack that would be the biggest attack since World War II. And it would have been disastrous for them.
Now, Donald Trump claims that Iran then pleaded with him that they really wanted to negotiate, and he changed his mind about an attack over the weekend. There's a lot more to get to there. Donald Trump quotes, Iranian quotes, but I want to bring in Dr. Trita Parsi right away here, because Trita, he said that Iran does not want to be attacked. You recently wrote an interesting piece where you said, I don't know that that's true, that they might have already calculated in that they're going to be attacked and are okay with that. So tell us a little bit about that first.
Well, let me first start by saying that the idea that the Iranians pleaded with Trump not to attack, I find extremely difficult to believe. It completely contradicts everything I think they've been trying to do for the last couple of weeks, which I think is a risky strategy, which goes to the core of your question. When they struck the Jordanians, which was not an immediate retaliation against an American strike, they were ready that the US would retaliate, which the US did. It doesn't mean that they want to be attacked, but essentially their calculation is if Trump still believes he has a major escalatory card that he hasn't played yet, and he's contemplating playing it, well, then the Iranians are signaling that they're ready for it, and they showcase how they would respond if that happened, how they would escalate horizontally if that happened. They struck Jordan, and then they also struck Egypt, apparently, with drone strike against American ships in Egypt, showing that none of these places, even though they're very far away from Iran, can be protected. So if the US has assets in those different places, they can all become targets. And I think that was a deliberate message from the Iranians that they're willing to escalate if he wants to escalate. And that if he wants to go to the negotiating table, and this is where I think the message may not have come across the way the Iranians perhaps intended to, is they're willing to negotiate, but then Trump needs to commit himself completely to the negotiating table, meaning that he needs to stop thinking that he can negotiate and every once in a while bomb a little bit in order to improve his negotiating position. And then whenever he feels like it, go back to the negotiating table. That's not a scenario the Iranians are going to accept. And as a result, they showcased their willingness to escalate as a way of deterring Trump, which I think, again, it is a risky strategy because it could have led to a much larger war. But the Iranian calculation appears to have been that it was even riskier not doing it.
Yeah, so I want to talk more about the Trump strategy and the Iranian strategy in a second, including is Iran even talking to us at this point? But Trump says they are, and that we have an imminent peace deal. Let's watch a little bit more from the president.
We were all set to go just about at this time right now, and it would have been a massive attack. We're all set to go, but when the allies ask to call it off, you got to sort of saying, well, let's see. And the reason they asked is I think there's a deal. There's a deal on Hormuz, and then there will be a deal on the nuclear, or you might call it the denuclearization of Iran. We were asked by the three primary groups. We were also asked by Iran, very strongly, actually. They said, we'd like to make a deal. Now, I don't know what they say, because a lot of times they'll say that to me, and then they'll go out and say, we don't know what he's talking about. Obviously, they don't want to be attacked. And they knew the extent of the attack because they saw it forming.
What happens now?
Well, now what we're doing is we're talking to them in the form of a negotiation. It begins tomorrow afternoon.
So he says we're negotiating with them and they were basically quaking their boots. I want to show you one more clip here.
Well, now what we're doing is we're talking to them in the form of a negotiation. It begins tomorrow afternoon, and we'll see if it's true. I'd love to do that, save a lot of lives, save a lot of unnecessary power, to be honest with you. It would take many, many years to ever build it back. If it could, I don't think it would be even buildable back. So we had an attack that would be the biggest attack since World War II, and it would have been disastrous for them. And they didn't want us to do it. And frankly, Saudi Arabia didn't want it either. They thought that a deal is imminent.
So I want to bring Trita back in here because there's two things here. Number one, I think that what he's saying is half true. The Saudis, the UAE, and Qatar did call and go, whoa, 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 what are you doing? If you attack Iran's oil and gas fields, they're going to attack our oil and gas fields, and that's going to be a disaster we cannot undo. Whether Iran actually called and said, oh, please don't do it, that sounds like the biggest BS I've ever heard in my life. But I'm curious what you think, Trita. But also, Iran and Oman are apparently having talks. And what does that mean and how does it relate to us?
So look, I agree with you fully. Part of that is actually true. Many of these Arab states have been pushing Trump very hard whenever they thought that he is actually planning on something big. Whether that was actually the case or not remains to be seen, but whenever they thought so, they intervened because they have lost faith in America's ability to win this militarily. And as a result, the US would be escalating, destroying a lot of things in Iran, and the Iranians would be retaliating by destroying similar things in the GCC states, but without actually changing the final outcome. So from the Arab perspective, they're going to pay a heavy price for a war that leads nowhere. So it's not surprising that they pleaded with him not to attack. I doubt that the Iranians did so, because I think the Iranians have come to the conclusion that if they show the slightest weakness, that will only incentivize Trump to attack them. So the only way to deter Trump from attacking is by being as tough as possible and be signaling that they're ready for a fight, which is the opposite of them going and pleading for talks. Now, there's another area in which I think Trump is speaking half-truths. It is not entirely false that they're talking. The US and Iran have been continuing to communicate throughout this period. That's different from negotiating. A distinction that is very important in the Iranian vocabulary, but I think Trump sees very little difference between the two, may not actually fully understand the difference between the two. And this goes to the issue of Iran and Oman talking and why that is important. The Iranians are trying to essentially establish a reality in which they say the future of the strait will only be determined formally by the two countries that have territorial waters in the strait, which is Iran and Oman. That's why they have rejected other GCC countries being formally part of those negotiations. So the negotiations are taking place with Oman. Now, Oman at this point is essentially trying to represent both the US position and the GCC position, rather than the position that Oman used to take, because Oman's position actually was not terribly far away from the Iranian one. That's where the negotiations are taking place. Talks can be taking place in many different other forums that are actually not negotiations. Again, a distinction that perhaps, frankly, doesn't carry a lot of meaning to the naked eye, but from the Iranian standpoint, it is important, I think, from them, their viewpoint, to establish that it's only the countries that border the strait that actually will have a say in the outcome. And that is something they're doing because they're trying to make sure that it's only between them and Oman, rather than between them, Oman, the full GCC, and other countries in which Iran will be completely isolated.
But Trita, what is the potential conclusion of those talks? So I hear you. So Iran has its own domestic audience, and they don't want to say that they're talking to the Americans about the Persian Gulf, and they have the Strait of Hormuz, and then they've got the whole world looking in as well. And so they want to say, hey, like you said, it's just these two countries that are hashing it out. But of course not. Of course, Oman is also representing a lot of other interests, the other Gulf countries, American interests, world trade interests, etc. So what is it that Iran wants out of that? We know what Oman, representing basically the West, for lack of a better way of putting it, wants, which is an open Strait of Hormuz. What does Iran want?
I think that's a very important question, because there's a perception that what the Iranians are trying to establish here is just full control. I don't think it's that simple. I think what the Iranians are looking for is to make sure that they still retain the ability to close the strait if the US restarts the war. That's different from fully controlling the strait. They understand that fully controlling the strait is just going to be very difficult for a lot of other countries to accept. But if they are co-managing it with Oman and they retain the ability to close it in case the US attacks again, that's actually their core interest. The US has to ask itself, what is its core interest? Is it to make sure that Iran doesn't have a semblance of control or an ability to close it in case there's a war? Or is it to make sure that the traffic actually flows?
Yes.
Traditionally, what we've been talking about is just to make sure that the traffic flows. If it is to make sure that the traffic flows, there is a pathway to a deal. It's not one that the US will like. It is not one that Trump will brag about, because it will ultimately indicate that this whole war ended up in a scenario in which the Iranian position advanced. But if the core interest is to make sure that the oil flows, that the oil prices come down, etc., there is a pathway towards a co-managed system in which the Iranians definitely keep it open, but they will retain an ability to close it again in case the US starts the war.
So I think a peace deal is actually incredibly easy. I'll ask you if that's really true in a minute after I give a little bit more updates on the war. But I'm going to stay on this for one more second, Trita, because what does it mean that Iran retains an ability to close the strait? Don't they retain that ability no matter what? They could just drone the strait whenever they want. So what is it that they're looking for that's codified in that regard?
So I think, again, that's very important to understand. And I think some parts of it is frankly a little bit easier in the direction that you said, because perhaps the Iranians still have that. But during the MOU, the US was trying to fortify a southern corridor in the strait, in the Omani territorial waters. And they were trying to essentially, at least this is how the Iranians perceive it. I think they're right on this one, because I think it is quite understandable that the US would try that. I don't think it is as smart to try it while you have an MOU, because then you essentially said that you should resolve the issue of the strait within the MOU, not outside of the MOU. But it was essentially an effort to try to fortify a southern corridor that would become normalized and that the US could keep open even if war restarted. Actually, before the MOU, the US had started to have greater and greater success getting ships through that southern lane without the Iranians being able to stop it. And this is part of the reason this whole thing blew up again, because the Iranians thought that the MOU was going to be used to find a final compromise on this. And the US side believed that whether there's an MOU or not, they're going to do everything they can to change the facts on the ground and make sure that there is a pathway that the Iranians cannot touch, regardless of what happens.
So yeah, that's what started the tit for tat, right? Iran hits a ship, America bombs for like 13 nights in a row, and then they declared that Iran had a surprise attack. I don't understand how it could be a surprise when we just bombed them 13 nights in a row. Was that a surprise attack? I don't know. So I understand all of that. What I don't understand is what Iran wants written down, because they can close the strait, it seems, anytime they want. So what do they want Oman to write down? That they have that Iran has the right to close the strait whenever they want?
No, I don't think it would be like that. There is a proposal on the table. I don't know where things stand since of yesterday. I have an update from back then, and essentially it goes back to a scenario in which the traffic will be managed by Oman and Iran, only the territorial waters, which means that you exclude the idea that the US has been pushing for, and many other countries have pushed for as well, which is that there is a middle corridor that is international waters. The Iranians never signed on to the Law of the Seas Treaty, nor has the US. The US is invoking that treaty in this situation because Oman signed it, but Iran never signed it, and it has been what is, I think, called a consistent objector to certain aspects of it. So what they're trying to do right now in these negotiations is to find some sort of an outcome. The Iranians are trying to make sure that this is co-managed between the two of them, which means that it excludes all other parties. It's not entirely clear to me whether the Omanis will accept it or not. But there are some interesting ideas that have been put on the table that may actually work. One being that all traffic comes in through a specific corridor that goes through both Iranian and Omani water, and all traffic that goes out goes through a different corridor. Both of them need to be coordinated with both of them. Both the inbound and the outbound traffic. It's a complicated issue. But anyways, it's a proposal that seems to have gained some traction. This is part of the reason why the Iranians started to say that they're close to a deal. And I think part of the reason why Trump suddenly thought that he had an excuse not to go forward with the bluff that he had put out there by claiming this deal. And then the Iranians come out and say, well, we're not negotiating with you. And this is then really pissing off Trump, because it means that whatever is being negotiated, he will not get credit for.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like the Iranians don't want an excuse of, oh, it was in international waters, it was in Oman's waters. They want it so that there's one pathway through that they can block legally, in their minds at least, if they feel like they need to.
If an agreement is reached based on what the Iranians want right now, my understanding is that that would ultimately trump all other types of measures, because again, it was never accepted whether the law of the seas is applying here, whether this is just territorial waters, etc. So it would create a new reality. And again, I think this is part of the reason why there's a part of this that is very unattractive to the Trump administration and to the US. And this would be very unattractive to anyone in the blob at the end of the day. But it goes again to the question, okay, what do we really care about? Them having a co-managed system, or actually the flow of trade in oil? If it is the latter, I think there will be elements in the Trump administration that says, let's just accept this and let's focus now on the nuclear issue and make sure that that part is something that is to the liking of the US in order to declare victory, rather than to turn all of this into the Strait of Hormuz, in which it's clear the United States does not have a military option.
Right. Well, in a minute, we're going to also get into how Israel can screw all this up. And that is relevant to this conversation because Iran might be holding the Strait of Hormuz as a trump card for that scenario. So that would affect the flow of traffic. But first, let me explain to the folks at home. Well, if you're wondering, well, aren't we the big mighty US? What are we negotiating with these Iranians for and letting them push us around? Well, it's because we've lost leverage entirely. Why are the Arab states, as Trita mentioned, lost faith in our ability to defend them? Well, let me explain. New York Times reports from General Dan Kane, who is the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that he warned Trump privately that, quote, resuming major combat operations against Iran was doable, but that it would dangerously deplete interceptors available to the military's Central Command, which is responsible for operations in the Middle East. So Patriot interceptors used to number over 4,000. They're now down to 827. THAAD missiles were at 452. They're down to 278. And so we're almost out of these missiles. And then we had one of our commanders over the weekend say, we're so low on missiles, we're forced to prioritize protecting the American homeland over protecting Israel. That's not a thing we should be forced into. That's a thing that should be obvious. He sounds like he's apologizing. I'm so sorry, Israel, that for like a half a minute, we're gonna prioritize Americans over Israelis. We know that's unforgivable. We're so sorry. You're obviously superior to us, but we're running out of missiles to even protect ourselves. And you can tell that because the Iranians hit our base in Jordan, killed 3 Americans. There's over 400 injured already. And Iran still has over 70% of their missiles intact. So this is not going well for us. And the Iranians certainly think they have the leverage. Wall Street Journal explains Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said talks with Oman about a mechanism for ships to traverse the Strait of Hormuz was, quote, nearing completion and in their final stages, according to Iranian state media. Left unsaid was whether Tehran is prepared to permanently drop its demand that it should be able to collect tolls from transiting commercial vessels, and if those negotiations would lead to a fully reopened waterway. But obviously, Iran feels confident that that's even a possibility, and they explain additionally. Araghchi also called his Saudi counterpart, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, to discuss further de-escalatory measures, according to the readout from Riyadh. But there it does seem, Trita, that Iran is at least saying, okay, before we get to destroying each other, yes, you could hit our oil fields, but yes, we could also hit your oil and gas fields, and there's now no longer any question about that. Let's see if we can work this out. So now comes what I mentioned earlier. Trita, isn't this actually really simple? We give Iran, Iran reopens up the Strait of Hormuz in the way that we described earlier, right? In a way that satisfies Iran and Oman and the rest of the counterparties, which seems like it's super close to happening. They never had a nuclear weapons program, so they don't mind giving it up, and they've said that at least a dozen times. So what are we even discussing here? I mean, other than Israel's absurd demands to take out every single drone and every single Iranian leader, which are just at this point totally, utterly unrealistic. They sound like they're escaped mental patients. So what's holding up an obvious and what looks like to me an easy deal here?
I think it comes down to the fact that Trump is unwilling to accept that he's essentially doesn't have any escalatory options, and that this kind of knockout blow that he's looking for simply doesn't exist. And as a result, he is taking increasingly desperate measures and rhetoric. I mean, some of the tweets that are coming out right now is just not healthy, to be frank with you. And he's unwilling to accept it. But I think there is a reality, and I think we will probably reach that reality relatively soon, in which there's going to have to be a very clear decision made. Are we going to further escalate over something that no one believes the US can achieve through escalation anyways? Or are we just going to be forced to bite the bullet on this one, get the best possible outcome on the strait, and then shift the focus to the nuclear issue? I suspect that that is the path that we will eventually go. The question is, how much more false threats, bluffs, escalation, actual strikes, more people getting killed will occur before we reach that point? And is there something else that may happen in between that potentially shifts the direction altogether? I wrote last week about how Zelensky was trying to sell the idea that Ukraine could come into all of this, enter the Iran war, merge the Ukraine and the Iran war theaters as a way of helping the US by opening up a new front against the Iranians. They shot a long-range drones at an Iranian ship in the Caspian Sea a week ago. And if you listen carefully to what Zelensky has been saying, he's been trying to put forward this narrative that these two wars are at the end of the day the same because Russia and Iran are on the same side and we should then treat the two of them the same. Trump seems to thankfully have not fallen for that because that would directly bring the US into a direct confrontation with a nuclear weapon state. So there's still, unpredictable events that could happen. But if none of those happen, I think the eventual structure of the situation is that the US is going to have to accept some sort of arrangement on this that is more to the liking of Iran than the US, but it will nevertheless meet the minimum key interest, which is to make sure that the strait is open. And then the focus is going to have to shift to the nuclear issue.
Yeah, so that brings us to Israel because Trump accepting a loss, people think like, oh, that's like a big deal to him, but I don't think so. I mean, there's a reason why there's Taco Tuesdays. Trump accepts defeat in fact, right? If not in speech, all the time. On the tariffs, he's turned around on a million issues. So when he thinks that it's only going to do him more damage to keep digging, he stops digging. That's generally been the case, right? Not all the time, of course. So, but here, when we're talking about what's preventing it, well, we know Iran doesn't mind giving up a nuclear weapons program that never existed in the first place. We know that they can live with an open Strait of Hormuz because we had an open Strait of Hormuz before the war. So Ukraine is an interesting example here, and so I want to stay on that for a second because it's not in Ukraine's interest to open up a second front for them. I mean, they already have enough trouble with Russia, so why would you want Iran attacking you on top of Russia? That doesn't make any sense. America certainly doesn't want that. Why would we want to be directly involved in a war against Russia that's nuclear armed? That's crazy. We don't want that at all. There is, of course, one country who would love it if the war broadened and became a larger war that we became intractable and we couldn't get out of, and that's Israel. So how in the world did the Ukrainians even get the coordinates for Iranian vehicles to hit in the Caspian Sea? I mean, do they not have enough problems with the Russians on their own? Who gave them that intelligence? It appears that it's Israel that's asking the Ukrainians to make this war broader and include Russia in it, which would make it borderline World War III.
So a couple of points. You're absolutely right. I think there's a very strong argument to be made, and I know that it has been made within the Ukrainian system, particularly from the military, in which they don't like this idea at all because they expect that Ukraine will get into the Iran war without the US getting into the Russia war. And the calculation on Zelensky's side appears to be, I mean, you just have to listen to what he's been saying as of late, that the return on investment actually is a positive one for Ukraine. Because if the US fully enters the war with Russia, which is something Ukraine has tried to achieve since 2022, from their standpoint, it makes sense, then it is worth it, but only if in that case. Otherwise, you're absolutely right. Ukraine would further overextend itself and now have the Iranians attacking them in a manner that would be quite devastating, of course, particularly mindful of the fact that the Ukrainians are very low on their interceptors. But the entire calculation only makes sense if you can drag the US into the Russia war. Now, again, it seems like his visit here was not particularly successful. Where I think you're absolutely right, Cenk, is that the one country that truly would view this as very desirable is Israel. One, it would prolong the Iran war. And this is something that the Israelis, I mean, not only did they push to start it, they pushed very strongly against the MOU. They were very upset about it, and they're terribly happy that the MOU more or less has collapsed and we're back at war. Secondly, it would bring the Europeans into the Iran war as well. They're already in the Ukraine war, but not so much in the Iran war. And thirdly, and perhaps this is the most important thing, it would enable them to completely reframe the war. Defeating Iran would no longer be about defending Israel. It would be about defending Ukraine. And mindful of the fact that Israel has completely tanked in almost every demographic in the United States, if you can reframe this and essentially erase the centrality of Israel in this equation and instead say that this is about Ukraine, a country that is polling much better, has very strong support, particularly on the Democratic side in the US, even more so in Europe, then you give this war with Iran a completely new lease on life, while at the same time minimizing the role and centrality of Israel in this equation altogether, at least to the naked eye. So I can see it being very attractive to the Israeli side. But again, it appears that the last week's visit here did not succeed in getting Trump to bite. I do suspect that they will continue to push for quite some time. I don't think they're going to give up on this quite yet.
Yeah, look, in a sense, we're burying the lead, and so is everybody in media. Israel is trying to drag us into a military confrontation with nuclear power Russia, the second largest military power in the world. That's insane. And yet, the beloved Israel. No, we're not gonna do that. That's so insane, even Donald Trump's not gonna do that. That's just totally out of the question. But meanwhile, the Israelification of our policies continues. We dropped a 2,000-pound bomb on a residential house, killed 3 people inside on Keshem Island in one of our bombings. So that leads me to the last question on this, Trita, which is, okay, let's say we do the logical deal, open up Strait of Hormuz, get rid of the nuclear weapons program. Again, doesn't exist, so it's easy, right? So, and we do a deal on the uranium. Okay, then we leave. Then Israel goes, yeah, well, this deal doesn't apply to me. I'm not leaving southern Lebanon, which they've already said. They already did that in the memorandum of understanding. I'm not leaving Gaza. I've got 70% of Gaza. I'm gonna keep it and try to get 100%. I'm not leaving anywhere. I'm not listening to any deal. I'm gonna keep on bombing everyone and trying to take more land. Is Iran gonna go, okay, whatever? Or are they going to then engage Israel once we've left on Lebanon at a minimum? And then what happens at that point?
Yeah, on Lebanon, I can see the Iranians not being willing to accept anything unless the Israelis are out of Lebanon. Lebanon is very important to the Iranians. They see that as their first line of defense against Israel. Look what happened in 2006. 2006, the Israelis and Hezbollah fought it out. And at the time, I had a conversation with the Deputy Defense Minister of Israel, Ephraim Sneh, who said that Lebanon is just a prelude. This war will inevitably lead to Iran. But Lebanon has to first be defeated, or Hezbollah has to first be defeated. The issue is that Israel failed to defeat Lebanon or Hezbollah at the time. And as a result, there wasn't a war between Israel, the United States, and Iran back in 2006. In fact, I remember the US military was actually very disappointed in the performance of the Israelis. There was a war, however, in 2024, 2025, 2026, precisely because at that time, Hezbollah had been dramatically weakened, particularly after the September 2024 pager attacks against Hezbollah. So the Iranians see Hezbollah as one of the guarantors that Israel will not attack them again. So as a result, any peace deal that allows the Israelis to occupy Lebanon, southern Lebanon, or defeat Hezbollah is going to be a suicidal thing for the Iranians to sign in their minds, because it will only enable Israel to down the road attack Iran again. So reestablishing that type of a presence in southern Lebanon as a deterrence against Israel, I think is the Iranians will not accept anything unless that gets achieved. And it was in the MOU. This is one of the things that was quite surprising with the MOU, that the Iranian line that there cannot be a ceasefire unless it is region-wide, meaning not only that the US, or sorry, that Israel will not attack Hezbollah or Hezbollah will not attack Israel, but also that Iran will not attack Israel. Unless it's region-wide, there's nothing to sign. And this was actually adopted by the Trump administration. Both Vance and Trump, on a couple of occasions, essentially said, we want something that is region-wide, otherwise it will not work. This is what absolutely infuriated the Israelis, because it meant, in their view, and they're not wrong, the United States for the first time had accepted southern Lebanon essentially as a sphere of influence of Iran, and that the Iranians would have a say in what happens there, which is, again, one of those outcomes of this war that is exactly the opposite of what the Israelis and the Trump administration wanted. So I think if this issue of the Strait is resolved and we move towards the nuclear issue, we still have this other, even perhaps more difficult issue, which is the region-wide ceasefire. It's going to be very difficult to achieve it in the sense, not in the sense of getting the Trump administration on board. We've already seen that happening once, but in the sense of forcing Israel to accept it.
Yeah, here's my plan. Don't worry about it. Let's make a deal with Iran. Let's get out of there. And if Iran and Israel want to keep fighting, that's their business, not our business. So if Israel's like, no.
And I can tell you there's going to be people in the administration that actually share that view, as long as the US is out of it, and as long as the US doesn't have to step in to support Israel defensively or offensively. Not only is it not the US's business, most likely the war will not happen, because the Israelis cannot conduct that war without extensive and continuous American support.
I'll guarantee you they will start the war, and then they will cry and cry and cry about how they have to be protected in a war they started. And at that point, obviously we should tell them to go pound sand. Okay, we got to take a break here. When we come back, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, and others are apparently starting a new party, America First Party. How will that affect American politics and foreign policy? We'll talk about it when we return. Let's go to members on TYT.com, and I'm reading these blind. Capsized Guam Dragon says, we were in talks with Iran the entire time. I was threatening to wipe them off the map. That's a quote he's attributing to Trump. He's kidding, but it is in essence what Trump is saying, right? I'm gonna kill all of you, and we're in perfectly good talks with smart people. He's a lunatic. Anyway, Jack C writes, saying if Trump agrees to two major points of the MOU, we might get somewhere. I'm telling you, Trump's already agreed to it. That's not the issue. The issue is Israel won't let us out of this. war. So Art Guy says the Trump strategy is, as always, to try and BS his way through everything. That's the most true of all. ALC 7701 says, don't be surprised that a person who slept with Hitler's book by his bed would want to compare his own fascist tendencies to World War II, hence his starting World War III. Yes, apparently Trump did read that. A lot of intellectuals also read it. I certainly wouldn't put Trump in that category. He has delusions of grandeur, that's for sure. And he thinks starting wars means he gets to end wars. In other words, not bright. Go Paddle Canoe says, so sad if Iran follows Trump's lead in committing war crimes such as attacking civilian infrastructure. Yeah, we don't want anybody attacking civilian infrastructure, but obviously they're going to do it they seem to have done it so far, and they will continue to do it if they are to be believed in a proportional way. I don't want any of it though. They wrote in again, Trump could redirect Bibi's next plane to either Mexico or Canada for a purported security threat, where he would be arrested for by the ICC or for the ICC. Well, that sounds like a fun plan. Not gonna happen. We'll be back.
They want to make you drink Starbucks every day from now until forever.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk Uygur and Trita Parsi with you guys. Before we go to our next story, I want to thank all these wonderful people who just became members through tyt.com/join. Some with funny and fun handles like Schnoz54, Julius77, Sabretooth Dragon, Baktafa9, Odd Amount, Deborah Heffington, MSN, Funky Mama, which sounds super fun, and D Bluer. You guys are all American heroes. We appreciate you for letting us do this honest and independent news show where we actually try to bring you the real news, not the ones filtered through Israel's propaganda machine, i.e. cable news. All right, let's go to the next story.
There is a group of us that have literally fought the system. And I think there's a group of us that if we decide to align, we could launch a true America-focused party that doesn't fall into the traps of Democrats and Republicans, but could align some serious players from the right and the left and move forward.
Well, the right-wing version of that has already assembled. So they put out a picture this weekend, Marjorie Taylor Greene's account did, where they were all together. And she said, we said no more foreign wars, and we meant it, and supported Donald Trump because he made that promise. But he's betrayed us all. Our commitment is America first for all Americans, the right, left, and center. The movement has begun. And then they included a picture. And there we have Marjorie Taylor Greene, Joe Kent and Tom Massie, along with their spouses, at Tucker Carlson's table, I believe in Maine. So that's their kitchen cabinet already right there, at least on the right-wing side. And so that is a very interesting turn of events. Of course, Donald Trump has attacked all of them in the past for daring to defy him. And all of this started with the Epstein files. He wanted to protect Epstein and all of his associates and all of the pedophiles. That's just a fact. And he has not prosecuted any of them. And to give credit to this group, they said, no, we didn't come here to be your cheerleaders. We came to do the things that we said we were going to do, including releasing the Epstein files and opposing war. So the Independent points out that Trump has unleashed harsh attacks on the former MAGA allies who turned against him, calling Greene a traitor, Kent a sleazebag, Carlson a low IQ person, that's always the funniest coming from Trump, and Massie weak and pathetic, all obvious projections that apply to him. Tucker Carlson for his end has said, yeah, no, we're ready for something different than the Republican Party. He told Columbia Journalism Review, there's going to be a third party and I'm going to do everything I can to bring that about. And Marjorie Taylor Greene made it clear that she wants nothing to do with the MAGA movement as it is today. So that is a big, big development, especially MAGA that aligns with Laura Loomer and Mark Levin. Let's watch.
I know that I am the person who informed the president of everything that Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens and Alex Jones were saying about him. And despite preparing a lot of these reports for the White House, it's my understanding a lot of this information was not given to him or explained to him in full, which is alarming because you have to ask yourself who surrounding the president is serving as a gatekeeper for the woke right.
A power vacuum. That's what's needed. Continue hitting ballistic missile and drone factories to destroy as much of its offensive military capability as possible, helping to protect, for example, the Arab oil infrastructure. And I know they're lobbying the White House. There have been reports on this. They're concerned about a wider war because they're concerned about the oil infrastructure, a worldwide depression, and so forth and so on. It won't happen. If we want victory and we want to get this over with, this is the only way to do it. And reconsider our aversion to hitting their oil production and refining facilities and infrastructure.
Those are exactly the kind of clips that drive this America First movement crazy, because they're saying, wait, Mark Levin just said we should prioritize protecting Israel over a worldwide depression and a wider war. No, thank you. No, we're not interested in prioritizing Israel's defense over the rest of the planet, literally. Laura Loomer just said there, I handed a blacklist of people to be fired on behalf of Israel, and Trump didn't fire all of them. How dare he not obey Israel? What is this? Why does Trump have to, or any president, have to fire anyone Israel wants fired? This is ludicrous. So Marjorie Taylor Greene responds, yep, new MAGA is repulsive. I want nothing to do with it and will not support anyone who doesn't speak out and stand up against it. And then for her part, Laura Loomer responds by saying, Marjorie Taylor Greene just called 100 million Americans who voted for MAGA repulsive. No, she said the new MAGA, as evidenced by you and the other traitors, are repulsive. Anyway, she continues, good luck getting people to join your wackadoodle neo-Nazi political movement with Tucker Carlson and Muslims in Michigan. Nobody wants to join your treasonous political movement. Okay, now let me bring in Trita here. Trita, this could have a lot of ramifications for American politics and in foreign policy. So first of all, what's your sense of whether they're going to actually form a different party and what kind of effect it might have? Is there any chance that that party could win a presidential election?
First of all, I think, as someone who is at a think tank that prefers to see a more restrained US foreign policy that is centering more on narrow definitions of US interests and avoiding these wars, I'm delighted to see that there's more efforts to move in that direction. I think also it's very important to recognize, particularly on the left, a lot of folks who are being very skeptical that there actually is a real strong anti-war sentiment on the right. I think anyone who's actually spent time with folks on the right see that actually is a very strong one. And those individuals that you mentioned, they could have stayed in that party. Some of them had a very strong relationship with Trump. They sacrificed all of that because they actually did stand for a much different foreign policy that is anti-war. So I think in and of itself, that is very positive. And I think it's very positive because we've seen the Trump movement starting off just as a cult. There's some ideas behind it, but those ideas have always been secondary. What's been really important is just some sort of allegiance to Trump. We're starting to see that break apart. We're seeing that it perhaps is going from cult to cultish, and that some of these ideas are starting to become more important than Trump himself in the eyes of key individuals. If that continues, and that one of the key ideas that come out of this is actually a real anti-war movement, in which, again, it goes beyond Trump. Trump is secondary to this. Then I personally think that that's a very positive development. Now, whether they manage to also marry this to folks on the left, which I would think is critical. You're not going to be able to have an impact unless this is actually something that works both on the left and the right. Remains to be seen, but this is in and of itself quite a significant development if the party, if they actually ultimately do launch this party. Yeah,
so I want to get to their electoral chances in a second, but to your point about cults, look, the problem that we have in our media is that everything is painted as binary, right? Either all Trump voters are in a cult or no Trump voters are in a cult. Now, the reality is, no, we just separated the wheat from the chaff, right? Just happened over the last 2 years. it turns out a whole heap of Trump voters were not in a cult. And you just saw some of his most avid supporters there saying, we're done with Trump, we're done with the Republican Party, we're gonna start a whole new party because he didn't do what he said he was gonna do. So obviously not in a cult, right? On the other hand, some portions still remain there and they're like, oh yeah, when we said anti-war, we meant pro-war. Well, that's what a cult sounds like. So it depends on who we're talking about. And on our side, by the way, let's be honest, we have cultish tendencies too, and we have tendencies to look at it from a binary perspective too. Tucker Carlson either has to have 100% of the right positions or that he's 100% a devil. Or it could be somewhere in between where some of his positions that are anti-war are terrific and some of his positions on LGBTQ issues, etc., are terrible. So why can't we use our minds to figure out where we support it and where we don't, instead of just going, no, that's it. He's either got to be a devil or an angel. Just doesn't make any sense. It's basically saying, look, I'm not going to try to come up with an intelligent answer here. I'm just going to go, blah, I hate the other side. So that's not going to be helpful to anyone. Now back to, yes, but do they have a chance? Trita, the only way that I see that it has a chance, and we're gonna have Joe Kent on here tomorrow in the same role that you're on today, and we'll talk to him about it a lot more thoroughly, is that if both parties nominate someone who's pro-Israel, and they say, we're not gonna change, forget the other issues, we're gonna serve Israel loyally, and it doesn't matter how many of our voters are opposed to it, you'll get no change at all. Then I think that party has some chance of winning. But if one of the parties says, no, we're not going to give Israel another dollar and we absolutely positively mean it, then I think it would probably take all the wind out of their sails. Does that make sense to you?
It does. I mean, that's one of the scenarios. We can also ask ourselves what, beyond winning, there's also influence. And the mere fact that this initiative is starting to take hold will pressure the party in the direction that they want, just as much as the DSA is effective in pushing the Democratic Party in a direction that certainly Joe Biden did not want. So again, your point earlier on about this not being binary is 100% correct. And I think it's also applicable to this situation, in which the mere formation of this is a way of pressuring the Republican Party. And again, I don't think that's going to really be ultimately successful until Trump is off the scene. But a lot of these people are looking at 2028 and looking what's going to be left of the GOP after that. Is it going to be a GOP in which Laura Loomer and Mark Levine and the neoconservatives are the dominant force once again, together with Marco Rubio? Or is it going to be a GOP that has completed the process of getting rid of a lot of that type of very hawkish thinking out of the party and moving more in the direction of what they now call America First, a narrow definition of US interest and a far higher bar for when the US should get involved in wars. That fight is still open, and it's not just determined in the elections, and it's not just determined in these midterms, but it will be a critical question after Trump has left the scene.
Yeah, and look, that's going to create a lot of pressure on the Republican Party to be careful about who they nominate, and that is how politics works. And by the way, it also creates an opportunity for the Democrats. If they nominate someone who is not pro-Israel, that whole faction could vote for them in the general election. So that would end the election immediately.
Yeah. One of the things that's really fascinating when you look at studies of young American voters today, it's really fascinating because they have just completely rid themselves of any type of affinity for either party or, frankly, either political figure. Whereas before, 20, 30 years ago, it was part of your identity, whether you were Republican or Democrat. And it really didn't matter what happened in the party. That was just who you were. You were always voting that way, and you always would be. And that's still very common amongst the boomers today. Whereas young people, they actually don't care about the party. They care about it as a vehicle for ideas. They care about the ideas, not even the individuals. We saw a lot of folks, of supporters of Bernie, even becoming quite negative towards Bernie over the Gaza issue, in which they felt that he was too slow to this. In many ways, it's very good because it centers ideas again. On the other hand, at times it can be highly problematic because it goes back to what you mentioned earlier on, which is there needs to be like a complete adherence and acceptance of that one specific idea. And oftentimes it's centered on one single idea rather than on a cluster of ideas. It makes things very simplistic. But given that, I do think that moving away from this two-party system is really needed, because the spectrum of opinions in the United States right now are just too wide. They're not captured by the two parties. And when you're trying to force all of these opinions, or half of them, into one party, it ends up creating a civil war in that party, in which you have people who really shouldn't be in a party together. If this was Europe, they would be on like 5 different parties, because the differences are so significant. But in our two-party system, we're just trying to squeeze everyone and that full spectrum of opinion into two parties, and it doesn't work any longer. It may have worked in the past because the spectrum of opinions were just much more narrow than it is today.
Yeah, and so that's why you have people like Bill Maher and James Carville saying both within the last week that they might leave the Democratic Party, and it appears that the number one reason is, oh, if you don't support Israel, we don't want to be part of your party. To which I say, don't threaten me with a good time. So maybe Bill Maher and James Carville might want to start a party of their own, which is corporate Democrats who sell you out to both corporations and foreign governments, and they could get a whole 2% of the vote, and that would be really interesting. I think they should give it a shot. All right, we'll talk more about that later in the program, but let's go to our next story now, because we've got more important news to talk about as well. So we've got Ben Shapiro versus Anna Kasparian. Okay, that's fun. Even when Anna's out, she's making news. So this is about Israel's role in what happened in Morocco and Spain. We talked about that last week and showed to you that Israel was a critical part of why the big immigrant surge happened into Spanish territory. I'll come back and show you why in a second. But first, let's see the shots fired on both sides. Anna takes a tweet from someone else, Starkian Hypothesis, saying, I was fairly reasonable towards Israel, but this Morocco thing makes it clear that Israel has become an enemy of the West as they attack Spain. And Anna says people are finally waking up. I always find that incredibly benign. I mean, wasn't the whole word woke about waking up? But when you apply it to Israel, of course, everybody goes, oh my God, you can't say that about Israel. Everybody go back to sleep and give us the money and give us wars. So of course, Ben Shapiro is gonna jump in and say, in essence, you're not allowed to say that. We control you. I mean, we don't control you. Wait, which one is it? Okay, Ben says the population of, and I don't know if I'm even allowed to quote him, but the R word, I'm just gonna say it, retarded conspiracyville is increasing at a nearly exponential rate. Malthusian rationing will soon be necessary. So it's a conspiracy theory that Israel would be involved in what happened in Morocco. That's why it's so weird that Ynet Global, an Israeli publication, wrote, Spain's refusal to allow the United States access to Sorota and Moran military bases during the Iran campaign, its consistent failure to meet NATO defense spending targets, and Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's confrontational posture toward the Trump administration have collectively generated something rare in North African affairs. A genuine crack in Spain's strategic armor over Quetta and Melilla. Into that crack, Morocco's most consequential new partner, Israel, is uniquely positioned to press. And they explain the Abraham Accords transformed Morocco from a quiet interlocutor with Israel to a formal military partner. So I'm gonna bring in Trita Parsi here, and then we're gonna go back to Anna and Ben's fight. This is fun. So we read a lot more from that Ynet article, Trita, last weekend on the show, and we showed Ben Gvir gleefully rubbing it into Spain like, now you've paid a price. We showed the clip of Benjamin Netanyahu saying that Spain will be punished for opposing Israel, and here we are. So is it a ridiculous conspiracy theory that Israel and Morocco, who are allies, would have coordinated this 60,000 people crossing into Spanish territory, or is it a perfectly legitimate theory?
It's a perfectly legitimate theory. I don't know if we have conclusive evidence, although there's plenty of circumstantial evidence. And I think the deeper thing, and in that last sentence that you read from, is really critical from that piece, because it's all about the Abraham Accords. The fact that after Emirates, Morocco, and other countries signed this and really became partners of Israel, What they may not have understood is that they also then became instruments in Israel's own rivalries. I've written about it when it comes to the UAE. To me, it was always stunningly stupid for the Emiratis to sign that agreement because they have their own problems with Iran. But now their problems have never been as deep and as unresolvable or difficult to resolve as Israel's problems with Iran. But by signing the Abraham Accord, they made themselves attached to Israel's conflict with Iran, while they themselves are right next to Iran and Israel is thousands of kilometers away. So it's really unwise to make your own policy with an immediate neighbor a function of that neighbor's tensions with another country, when you're going to pay the price for that, which the UAE did during the first round of this war, in which they were hammered by the Iranians. And now in the second round, incidentally, very interestingly, they were spared. And the reason why they were spared is because they had actually transferred billions of dollars to the Iranians. So for the Emirates to be spared, they actually had to give Iran more as a result of them signing this Abraham Accord and making themselves an instrument of Israel's larger strategy.
Yeah.
It may perhaps not have been as difficult, the calculation for the Moroccans, but now we're seeing that the Abraham Accords has not only destabilized much of the region, but also extended into having a destabilizing effect on North Africa. Because at the end of the day, Morocco and Spain have a very, very important relationship, and largely a good one. It's being destabilized because of this alliance that Morocco has signed with Israel, which was extremely unwise.
Yeah, and the idea of working with the Israelis, if you're Morocco, is so blindingly stupid. And you're gonna see that in the last thing that I'm gonna read you here. But let me go back to the war between Anna and Ben and the rest of the Morocco story. And then I wanna get your thoughts at the end there. So Anna writes back to Ben in response to the last tweet that we read, you guys. I know you think you're a genius and the rest of us are just too stupid to see through the BS. Keep underestimating people, Ben. It's working out great for you. Of course, that's a reference to the fact that he has almost no audience left at all. So then Shapiro responds, I don't think you're stupid at all. I think you know precisely what you're doing. You're promoting evil and dishonest conspiracies and doing it precisely because it's popular. Yes, it is popular to point out facts about how Israel continues to manipulate all the countries that it works with into disgusting actions like the one that happened in Morocco that get people killed. 34 people died there. And of course, the Israelis don't care because they're not Israelis. So they're just cannon fodder for Israel. And Ben Shapiro is, of course, very upset that his pro-Israel propaganda isn't working anymore in America. And now we're finding out the truth. And he's like, oh, we used to be able to bottle all of this up. My beloved mainstream media protectors, where are you to lie about Anna and everyone else? We need you out there doing double time, calling everyone an anti-Semite. If you've got to call everyone in America an anti-Semite, it's the least you could do for Israel. Israel wants you, Uncle Ben. And then he's gonna, I don't know, meme it out, okay? But so now here's the reality. Back to, actually, I'll give you one more from Anna before we go back to the Israeli papers explaining how it is actually Israel. Anna wrote, the gaslighting doesn't work anymore, so Ben suggests starving Israel's critics to death to really highlight who the new Nazis are. It's the most honest thing he's ever told us. He's ever said. So yes, Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, and so many others have advocated for starving the Palestinians. And they don't think that the Palestinians' lives are worth anything really, let alone the equivalent of an Israeli life. So, but their brutality and their pro-genocide positions have been glaringly obvious this entire time. They revel in all the death and destruction that Israel has caused, the genocides, the occupation, and the oppression. So that's just Ben Shapiro 101. But back to the Morocco instance, Ynet Global wrote, Israel's voice in that triangle, meaning America, Morocco, and Israel, carries disproportionate weight. Oh, wait a minute, I thought that was a conspiracy theory that Israel's voice carries disproportionate weight, but here's the Israelis bragging about it. He continues, Amin Youb does, when Israeli officials signal alignment with a partner's strategic interests, that signal registers powerfully in a White House that has placed the Abraham Accords at the center of its foreign policy vision. So, but that Israeli paper is not alone. Michael Rubin, who is a director of policy analysis at the Middle East Forum, says, Morocco should send a new green march into Quetta and Melilla. And this happened before Morocco actually did that. That's weird. A pro-Israel writer suggested that they do the same exact thing that they wound up doing. Rubin wrote, Quetta and Melilla might be relatively tiny towns, but they represent illegitimate beachheads and are home to approximately 170,000 Spanish settlers. They are a weak spot for European security since African migrants regularly rush the fence to claim asylum. Hint, hint, please do that now, right? So Rubin is claiming, oh my God, I'm so worried about settlers. No, not the Israeli settlers. They're allowed to butcher anyone they like and steal all their land. But the Spanish, the West is the real problem. The Spanish are a problem because they oppose Israel. They should be immediately flooded with immigration, and they're the real settlers. Oh, okay, yeah. Michael Rubin continued, Moroccans should gather, send bulldozers to the border, and then enter Quetta and Melilla unarmed to raise the flag. Oh, look at that. That's exactly what they did after Israel suggested it to them, in my opinion. So finally, we come to Laura Loomer here because this is going to go to the stupidity of Moroccan leaders, which is apparently at its peak. Loomer writes, the invasion of Spain by Islamic third world parasites, parodying basically Nazi language, is bad for society, but good for the acceleration we need to make the general public harbor animosity towards Islam. So she just admits she's a bigot and wants all of you to be bigots, and Israel wants you to be bigots. So that's, thank you for the confessions, Laura, but you confess to being a terrible, evil, immoral person all the time. But listen to the rest. We aren't saving the West, she says, until people realize Islam is our enemy. Now, of course, if you said we need to save the West by saying the Jews are our enemy, of course, everyone would explode in shock, and that person would be completely eliminated from the national conversation. But Laura Loomer is allowed to say it about Islam with absolutely no repercussions. In fact, she continues to be able to fire people at the White House anytime she wants. Fascinating. Why would this random blogger or vlogger or whatever she is with no followers at all have that kind of power unless she represents something else, something very powerful, which is the Israeli lobby? She continues, events like the one in Spain build more consensus. We need the majority of the world to come to hate Islam for people to have the courage to save Western civilization from what comes next. So now I read that post to you, Trita, because, okay, so Morocco destabilizes itself by doing this gambit with Israel. Half the people go back the very next day because there's no food or water there to survive on. 34 people died. It becomes a giant mess. It gets them no advantage whatsoever. And at the end of the day, the pro-Israel factions here in America and in the rest of the West use it to demonize Muslims and say, oh, that's why you can't trust the dirty Moroccans and all their immigrants that are pouring into the West. Could they have played this any worse? Do they realize how incredibly stupid this decision to back Israel was?
Talk about several European states immediately reacting, rivals of Spain because they're from the right wing, whereas Sanchez is left wing, coming out and essentially pushing Spain out of the Schengen agreement. Over something that was orchestrated against Spain. And even if this had happened fully, which it didn't at the end of the day, there would still be more migrants coming in through Italy than us coming through Spain. So I think there was another thing that was achieved here from the Israeli standpoint, which is really reducing the cohesion and solidarity within the European Union, essentially dividing them and isolating those countries within the European Union who have had the integrity and the courage to stand up against Israel's genocide in Gaza. And amongst Europeans, the only three ones that really stand out, of course, is Ireland, Slovenia, and Spain. And Spain has probably done more than any of them. So, it's not just what they did in that sense. It's also the manner in which they really managed to get Europeans to go at each other in a way that usually we don't see, not in a situation like this. And I think ultimately all of this has backfired. Now, of course, how it plays out in internal Spanish politics remains to be seen. But the initial objectives of this maneuver to essentially really isolate and portray Sanchez as weak and incapable, I think, has really failed. Rather, it is Spain that is a victim to a conspiracy against Spain. That seems to be the conclusion that most Spaniards are drawing at this point.
Yeah, and the people of Morocco should know that their leaders betrayed them, did a deal with Israel, and then Israel used that deal and the agreement to paint Muslims and Moroccans in particular as savages and something to be feared and despised. So I could not imagine Moroccan leadership doing a worse job. Okay, and now that I've gotten banned from another country, I'm sure we can end that segment. Okay, so Trita Parsi's on Substack. He's from the Quincy Institute. And Trita, we really appreciate your expertise, especially on
Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, now when we come back, some in the Democratic Party, Bill Maher, James Carville, and others have Hasan derangement syndrome, and they're threatening to leave the party. And I can't wait to tell you about this fight. And I was gonna say whose side I'm on, but look, I'm not on the DSA side, but which side I'm gonna come out on ultimately is not going to be unclear. We'll do that when we return.
I don't care if you're Christian. In fact, I will fight for you to have your religious liberty and practice your Christianity. I believe in that. I don't believe in Christianity, which means that you do not get to dictate the way I live my life based on your religion. I don't care what the Bible says. You have every right in the world. All those women who identify with your religion have every right in the world to not get an abortion, to not take birth control, but they do not have the right to dictate my life and what I decide to do with my body. I don't care about your goddamn religion. I'm so tired of having nonstop conversations about what the Bible says. You live your life in the way that you interpret the Bible. Again, I don't care, but you don't get to take the Bible and tell me, well, the Bible says this in this chapter, in this verse. I don't care. I don't care, I don't believe in it, and I have the right, based on our Constitution, to not believe in it.
No part of Gaza has been left unscathed. Ain't a whole lot left. I don't know why they need any more bombs. Let us be clear. The United States provided $18 billion in military aid to Israel. Netanyahu, indiscriminate bombardment, have killed more than 50,000 civilians, 60% of whom are women, children, paramedics, and journalists. All of this is against basic human decency. You don't starve children with absolutely no humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. It is a war crime. It is illegal for the United States government to provide Israel with more offensive weapons. History will not forgive us.
We've been on our phones too much. I feel like we just need to touch grass or something.
I told you. I mean, you know what? Let's actually do it. Let's touch the grass. Whoa. Andrew Yang? It's not racist, right? It's him.
Yes, it is I, Andrew Yang, out here giving money away as usual.
Wait, but literally?
Do you use a phone? Noble Mobile will cut your wireless bill in half every month, and you get paid even more if you log off, look up, and touch grass.
Oh, I actually have some grass if you...
I don't think that's the kind of grass.
Not that kind of grass, unfortunately.
Whoa, wait, what the...
Whoa.
I guess that kind of grass works too. All grass works.
All grass and we get cash?
Wait, did you see that, babe?
Noble Mobile, make it rain, girl, make it rain, make it. That didn't rain so good, but now it's raining good.
Corruption, injustice, the system is rigged against you. Every day we're blasted by a flurry of terrible news from every angle, which can make it challenging to stay positive and know how to fight back. The Damage Report is your solution. I'm Johnny DeRola, and my daily morning show cuts through the noise and exposes the real damage being done to our country, the world, and how we can fight back against it. Corporate greed crushing workers? We'll name names. Politicians selling you out for their corporate overlords? We've got the receipts. Climate disaster, economic collapse, the rise of fascism. No spin, no establishment talking points, just the truth that you need to survive and resist. But it's not all doom and gloom. We'd love to have you join the Dragon Squad, our community of positive-minded activists who turn the day's news into positive action. With new episodes every weekday, listen to The Damage Report to get honest news, unflinching commentary, and daring coverage you won't find anywhere else. Listen to The Damage Report on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, because understanding the damage is the first step to fixing it.
I'm humping this thing like a young dog on old fur.
This guy, Hasan Piker.
All right, back on the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur and Yasmin Khan with you guys. So we've got a lot of stories to get to, Yaz. So I'm going to just jump into this first one, which is full of twists and turns. Let's watch.
I'm not going to be in the same party with Hasan Piker. I can tell you that right now. If he becomes a force in the Democratic Party, I'm out of here. I have no intention of ever being in the same political party with that guy.
Ooh, don't dare us with a good time there, James. I will leave. And then what happens? You leave and we lose 1 vote and probably gain 1 million. So what? Okay, so both him and Bill Maher have Hasan derangement syndrome, but really it has nothing to do with Hasan. It has really nothing to do with DSA. It has everything to do with, will we support Israel or not? So we're gonna explain that to you and we're gonna show that to you. Let's go to Bill Maher next as an example. It's so ironic, he says, from the people who obsess about colonization. You know what's being colonized now? The Democratic Party. And who does he say is colonizing the Democratic Party? Democratic voters. How dare you? Don't you know that your superiors have already decided they should pick a douchebag who's for corporate PACs and AIPAC? To raising your head like this. How insolent. Now he claims it's the DSA. Now, I think there's a nuanced conversation to have about the DSA because nothing is binary. You don't have to be either for Hillary Clinton or the entire DSA agenda. There is something in between, but of course, Bill Maher claims that he's so stupid he doesn't understand that. He's like, what is nuance? If DSA exists, you must support Israel, otherwise you're a DSA communist. Yeah, sure, Bill, sure. He says, people gotta realize this is going on. Yes, my vote is in play. Oh my God, what would we do without those 2 votes, you and James? Anyway, he says, I'm not voting for anyone who thinks the wrong side won the Cold War or cheers for the Intifada like it's the World Cup. Now we're getting to the real issue. So he claims, well, they want to abolish prisons in the Senate and that's outrageous. Well, a lot of people think that's outrageous. In fact, that is a very minority position within the Democratic Party. Most Democratic voters don't agree with that at all. Then he says, and that's why all their positions are wrong, including universal health care. That polls at 70%. And celebrating Palestinians as if they should have freedom. That polls at 80% with Democratic voters. You see the trick there? The trick is to take rando positions that almost no one supports, like abolishing prisons, and pretend that they're in the same bucket as incredibly popular positions like Medicare for all and defunding Israel. Yes, I've got a lot more where that came from, but what's your take here? Is Maher right that if we sign up for Medicare for all or defunding Israel, that means that's it? We all have to be communists. We can't do nuance, it's impossible.
It's the end of the Democratic Party as we know it, Cenk, and that apparently is a big problem for a lot of people. You know, this is so funny to me because the people who are crying about people like Hasan Piker and leftists in general, the DSA, whatever, they are acting like we are the equivalent of MAGA or like the Proud Boys or like the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, okay? We are not asking for people to get kicked out of the country. We're not asking for more surveillance cameras. We're not asking for corporations to like just be able to run amok with all of our money all the time. We're not asking for terrorists. We're not asking to invade Greenland. None of that. We're asking for people to have health care. We're asking for social programs that used to exist in this country to just come back and exist again. Maybe we can fix them if they weren't working well the first go round, but that we just want that to at least be a conversation, a debate that we can have as a country. And we're tired of waiting for things. We are tired of so many Americans feeling as though they cannot get their heads above water. People can't buy houses because the housing market has been screwed over intentionally by the powers that be. People can't access healthcare for the same reason. People can barely buy cars anymore. They're putting tariffs on other cars that would be more affordable here in the United States. Everything is working against the American people right now. And the one thing that Donald Trump ran on, well, one of the big things he ran on, I should say, was a populist platform. He said he was for the people, and the people were like, yes, we want someone who is for the people. We want someone who's going to bring jobs back to the United States. People can barely find jobs anymore, let alone jobs that pay well enough that Americans can live comfortably in the United States. And he also said that he was going to address the affordability crisis while he was on the campaign trail. He said he was going to bring grocery prices down. He said he was going to bring gas prices down. He hasn't done any of that. And on the left, all we're saying is we want that, but like actually, like we're not fronting when we say we want to lower prices. That is something that we actually want to do. We want things to be higher quality as much as they can be. These are just like very common sense things to ask for. But the fact that people like Bill Maher and this old man from Louisiana, like the fact that they are so worried about all of this says more about them than it does about us, honestly. Yeah. And really, one of the things that is one of the big complaints against the Democratic Party is that they are severely out of touch with the average American people. And the reason for that is that they all make a ton of money. The people at the very top of the Democratic Party right now, they are all uber wealthy. They have enriched themselves somehow via their positions within the Democratic Party, and they really have no idea what it is the American people want anymore. And every time we try to tell them, they just don't listen, or they just pretend like they can't hear you. I don't know what you're saying right now.
Yeah.
So that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, so look, I've literally had these debates and been on the other side of DSA ideology, right? So Anna and I debated folks on the left about abolishing prisons. We thought it was crazy, right? But what we didn't say was, now you have to leave the party because I'm the mayor of Leftville. In fact, that was the exact opposite of what we said. We said, look, guys, you claim that you speak for the left, but the great majority of Democratic voters don't agree with this. So I don't mind you having any opinion you like, just as long as you say everyone's allowed to have their opinion. Now we got to turn around to Bill Maher and say the same thing. Bill, you can have any opinion you like, and on the prison issue, for example, I would agree with you. But that you don't get to banish people from the party. The only people who decide who's in the party and who's not are the voters. And so this whole idea of like, well, if the Democrats have Hasan in their party or anybody who's in the DSA, they must banish them, otherwise King Maher will leave the party. Well then, if you think you're the king, bro, nobody elected you that. So if you're upset that you're not getting every single thing that you want, I guess that's a sad day for you. So take a hike. We don't need you. We don't need that attitude. I don't need that attitude from either side. I believe in the voters and letting them decide. So now back to Maher's disingenuous tricks. Actually, before I do that, I want to ask you guys a question because we got a poll on tyt.com and I'm curious what you guys think about it. Do you care if Bill Maher and James Carville leave the Democratic Party? A, yes, we can't win without them. B, no, good riddance. C, I don't mind if they stay or go. And D, I actively want them to leave so our party will be less corrupt and better reflect democratic values. So I'm curious how you guys are going to answer that, tyt.com to take that poll. So now let's explain how disingenuous Bill Maher is. Now he can have his opinion, and on some of those issues I agree with him, on some of them I obviously greatly disagree with him. But look at how he frames it. He says last month, 2 Democratic congressmen released an open pledge. They wanted their fellow Democratic members to sign. It said, we are capitalists, not socialists. We want safety, not lawlessness. We are proud, not ashamed of America. These should not be hard words for a congressional Democrat to sign on to. You know how many did? 8. 8 out of, I think it's 212. Yeah, 212. So now I give that as a great example of disingenuous framing. I agree with the sentences in that statement, but I wouldn't have signed it. Why wouldn't I have signed it? Because those guys are going out there and making it appear that the other faction in the Democratic Party are not loyal to the Democratic Party, are not loyal to this country, and want anarchy and all of these other things. They're trying to smear the other portion of the party. That only helps the Republicans. Having an internal debate, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that because we need the voters to decide who's right, who's wrong, which direction should we go in. But disqualifying people and saying, oh, well, you guys are anti-American and you shouldn't be allowed to be Democrats. No. And then saying, oh, you see that? The 8 conservative, pro-corporate, pro-Israel Democrats are the only real Democrats, and the other 204 of them are no good and should be driven from the party. And it's trying to make it seem like some of the radical positions he pointed out are agreed to by most of the Democrats. But he then acknowledges this nonsense is not where most Democratic politicians are right now. Well then, Bill, if that's the case, why did you try to paint it as if the great majority agree with radical positions? But which positions are radical and which ones aren't? Well, you didn't clarify any of that. You threw incredibly popular positions into the radical bucket, and that's a trick to protect, of course, Israel. And at this point, Bill, I'll skip down to graphic 7, says this outrageous quote: "It's so funny, so many liberals crap themselves every time Trump puts gold on something in the Oval Office. Oh, it's historic, and the separation of powers isn't? Get your head out of your ass. I would vote for Sarah Palin before this crap. She's a bimbo, but if you asked her to come up with something like that she likes about America, she could do it, you betcha." Well, so let me get this right. Sarah Palin says that there should be no abortion even in cases of rape or incest. She says there should be no gay marriage or even civil unions, but none of that disqualifies her. As long as she's, oh, look at this, pro-Israel, huh? For example, Palin said, I believe that the Jewish settlements should be allowed to be expanded upon because that population of Israel is going to grow. So as long as she backs the religious lunatic settlers in the West Bank, Bill Maher goes, oh, you're for total extreme positions on LGBTQ issues, abortion, and literally every other issue that he doesn't agree on. But if you're pro-Israel, I'll sign up. But if you're a Democrat and you're not for Israel, I'm gonna leave the party and join Sarah Palin. Well, do we mind, Bill? No, we don't. So can you leave? Yeah, betcha. All right, one more time here, Yaz. This whole nonsense to me seems like it's centered around trying to wrap the very popular anti-Israel position along with these positions of abolishing the Senate, the police, etc., that are not polling as well, into one package in order to try to trick Democratic voters into thinking that 80% of them are radicals, because that's the number that don't support Israel anymore.
Yeah, and it's obvious what they're doing. It's unfair what they're doing, and they're acting, like I said earlier, they're acting like we're MAGA, and we're really not. And like people who are threatening to leave the Democratic Party, you have to ask, where will you go? Where are you gonna go? You're gonna just be a Republican now? You're gonna go vote for Sarah Palin, who's not even like anywhere near politics right now? It doesn't make any sense, but they do. They treat us like we're MAGA, but leftists, progressives, we're significantly less cultish, right? We don't come with a pre-packaged set of ideas that we just all blindly accept. And I will admit that there is some cultish behavior on the left, like maybe a good amount, right? Of course there is, but we're generally not blindly loyal to anyone. We love Zoran, we love Bernie, but we're not expecting them to be perfect all the time. And if they do something that we don't like, we will be the first ones to call them out and demand some kind of accountability from them, not the Republicans. And we don't just accept things that are given to us. And sometimes that actually hurts our cause. But for leftists and progressives, usually we have very strong principles. And if a violation of those principles is typically not a bridge that many of us are willing to cross. But what they're trying to do is make it sound like we're so scary. We want to abolish the police. Not every leftist wants to abolish the police, but we would like the police to have some kind of accountability for their actions. And we would like for them to please stop killing people, American people in the streets, okay? We would like that. I don't think that's that much big of an ask I don't think that that is radical in any way. I think that's a pretty normal position to have. And it's kind of weird that they're acting like that's not normal.
Yeah.
So they have to make it sound scarier than it is. And then they have to act like we don't love the United States of America. Like this is our home. We all live here, okay? Either by choice or because we grew up here, we were born here, whatever the case is, this is our home. We love it in a very specific kind of way, okay? Like if you love something, you want it to be as good as it can be. We see how good things can be, not necessarily loving the way that they are, but we're like, but it could be better, and why can't it be, right? We're dreamers, we have better imaginations than they do on the right, apparently, and we believe in ourselves. We believe in this country arguably more than they do, because we're not willing to accept less for ourselves and less for this country and less for the land itself. We want better, and I think that that's within our grasp, and like, God help us if that's a bad position to have.
Yeah, I'll end on this. Unlike Bill Maher and James Carville, I'm not stupid. So I don't have to accept a position of either I have to be 100% for DSA or 0% for DSA. I could be somewhere in the middle. I know, that's gonna really challenge them. And they're like, I don't know. Everything has to be black and white. I can't use my mind. So I don't know what the percentage I disagree with DSA on is. I don't know if it's 20%, 30, 40, whatever it might be, right? But what kind of logic does it make to say, hey, I disagree with 20% of what DSA says, which by the way, they don't run the Democratic Party. They're just a couple of members inside the Democratic Party. Since a couple of people in my party, I disagree with 20%, I'm gonna go over to the party that I disagree with 98%. Well, only stupid people would say that. So enjoy that, Bill and James. All right, when we come back, we're not done with Hasan derangement syndrome. CNN did a whole hour on it. Oh my God. And then what DNC left out of their autopsy. So a lot more to get to. We'll be right back.
This guy, Hasan Piker.
All right, we're also on X these days, so let's go to Patrick J. Dillon on there. He says simply, Trump is owned by Israel. Let's go to Super Chat on YouTube. Mike Dave says, Israel was willing and almost succeeded in starting World War III. And he's not even talking about them trying to drag us into a war with Russia today. He's saying nuke-armed bombers were en route to Cairo after the USS Liberty attack. If not for those brave sailors jerry-rigging an antenna under Israeli fire, we'd be dead. Look, I don't know about that ultimate conclusion, but I do know, because Jonathan Pollard admitted it, that Israel had loaded up nukes on a plane, and it was partly to threaten us, saying you better not do anything about us murdering your sailors on the USS Liberty, because we've got these nukes and we might cause worldwide devastation with them and drag you into World War III. So that's kind of the sick allies Israel is. Make It Make Sense says, I just want to point out that there are military options, just not publicly supported military options. You can't tell me the USA military doesn't have the ability to 100% obliterate Iran, because it can. Of course it can, right? But we've decided that we're not going to be monsters. We're not going to use our nuclear weapons, we're not going to do carpet bombing, and we're not going to murder civilians in horrific ways. So I love that we made those decisions. And within what is now the international laws of war, yeah, we cannot win this war. A good reason not to start wars. And there was no need for this one, and it actually was counterproductive and set us back. Jim Huggett on YouTube member section says, AOC for Senate 2028, get rid of Chuck Schumer. I agree with that 100%. We'll be back.
This earth warming and carbon is actually healthy for us.
All right, back on Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, Yasmin Khan with you guys. Also, Jeremy Aratsky, 781, thanks for joining through YouTube. We really appreciate it. So many who have joined through tyt.com/join as well. We love you guys, and we can't do the show without you. And thank you for supporting us through times that are not easy. But all right, now I want to tell you about a good product that could help you out too. So it's Chili Pad 2.0. So, a lot of us are doom scrolling at night, and it actually gets your body temperature up. The stress, the screen time, all of that raises your core body temperature. And that's why it's harder to get into deep sleep. That's why we're recommending Chili Pad 2.0. It's a water-based mattress topper that actively controls the bed temperature from 55 to 115 degrees all night long. No new mattress, no renovation. It actively cools using just water. Fans move the hot air around. The water actually cools your body, pulls the heat away. So it's got remote senses that know when you get into bed and kick on automatically. It's got dual zones, which means you and your partner each set out your own temperature. No subscriptions needed. You get a 2-year warranty, and they're designed and assembled in the USA. So visit www.sleep.me/TYT. Obviously, you could use that QR code on the screen as well. By the way, you get up to $255 off your Chili Pad 2.0 with code TYT. That's www.sleep.me/TYT. Free shipping, free returns, and a 30-night trial so you can test it out, dream big, and wake up better. Okay, so now let's go to the next story that we've got. Let's watch.
As Piker's influence has grown, so too has scrutiny of his political positions and his past statements. Some view Piker and the wider DSA and left-wing movement as dangerous.
Hasan Piker, one of the most outspoken, toxic, anti-Semitic influencers in the world.
But others see the campaign as a reckoning for a party out of step with its voters.
There's a fascinating movement afoot to equate my nephew Hasan Piker with the entire Democratic Party. It appears to me that the establishment has decided that, oh my God, if we just pretend that Hasan is unpopular, then why do all those people show up? And we call him an anti-Semite, even though he's avowedly not that, and he rejects anti-Semitism and talks about it on the air. We'll be able to smear all Democrats. And so CNN did a whole hour-long special on it, which was a little bit more balanced, but it had a central problem that we're going to talk about in a second. But Yaz is here to tell us all about it.
Yeah, so the special aired on CNN, and it was called The Whole Story, The Left Insurgency. And the whole story is, I guess, Hasan Piker. But it also involves David Hogg, and it's talking about their attempts to move the entire Democratic Party further to the left. We are going to focus on Hasan Piker for the sake of time today, but there is some good stuff in there about David Hogg that's worth watching. But Hasan Piker, as I'm sure most of you know by now, has been campaigning across the country with various progressive candidates. So just this weekend, he was traveling to support Donovan McKinney, who is a House candidate in Michigan, as well as Francesca Hong, a candidate for the Wisconsin governor's race. But Hasan Piker, by the way, just turned 35 years old, and that is significant because now he can technically run for president if he wants to. However, he says he's not trying to do any of that. Let's see.
It feels like you're running. No, it's what people keep saying, but I'm not. Are you concerned that pushing the candidates that you're pushing, you might end up hurting the Democrats nationally in a general election?
I've heard this concern a lot. They said my allegiance with Zoran was actually going to hurt his chances. Andrew Cuomo tried to exploit that. He tried to really hammer on this point that I was a dangerous radical, and so was Zoran by associating with me. I think for far too long, the conventional wisdom in Washington was don't respond to the needs of the people. Always focus test your messaging and try to find a moderate centrist vision. And we're finding out that the Zoran-style candidacy, the Bernie-crats, are rising up in popularity and fighting against the establishment and seeing tremendous success.
Yeah, and Bernie, for example, has always been popular. He's been popular for like the last 10 years at least, and obviously more so, but very popular within the last 10 years. And his platform is the same. It's been very consistent. But to Piker's point, the establishment Democrats do seem very nervous about the rise of more progressive candidates who are entering races and they're winning those races. So here is Jonathan Cowan to that point, who runs a centrist think tank called Third Way. Let's see what he has to say.
Hasan Piker is unknown to most Americans who determine elections. Swing independent voters had never heard of Hasan Piker. The ones who have wouldn't like him. He's known and popular among a very small subset of young people who are super online and very radicalized. Fine, have at it. That's how he makes a living.
You mentioned Piker isn't that famous, but you wrote a Wall Street Journal op-ed about him. Why did you think it was important to do that?
We called him out because we wanted to warn mainstream Democrats not to associate with him, not to elevate him, not to put him on their platforms or campaign with him, because in fact, that will drive away the swing independent and moderate voters that they need to win.
The Streisand effect in full effect there. Also, Democratic Representative Josh Gottheimer is a fellow Hasan Piker hater, okay? So he even co-authored a House resolution to condemn Hasan Piker for allegedly anti-Semitic behavior and speech. Here is what Gottheimer told CNN.
Are you surprised at just how big an issue Israel has become?
I'm kind of surprised how this issue has become almost a litmus test in primaries across the country.
How do you think that's happened?
Sometimes these issues just, they get a mind of their own. I don't even think when I talk to voters about it and say, well, you're screaming and yelling at me, what really are you upset about? And it's based on I think, a lot of disinformation out there. I often don't really get an answer except, I don't know, I saw something on TikTok.
Hasan Piker. You introduced a resolution condemning him, along with Candace Owens,
correct,
for I think what you characterize as anti-Semitic hate speech. Can you talk us through why was it important to single out Hasan Piker and Candace Owens in particular?
Well, when you start ignoring hatred, and this is, again, look at history against any community, and the hatred bubbles up. And if you don't put it out, if you don't extinguish the fire, the flames just grow. And Hasan Piker is not just some random guy walking down the street screaming something hate-filled. He has millions of followers on his streaming platform.
Cenk, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the more controversial statements that Hasan has made, as well as his actual position on anti-Semitism. But what's interesting about all of this to me is the more that they complain about it, like we have a whole hour on CNN talking about Hasan Piker. So the people that they're talking about who don't even know about him except for the chronically online leftists, well, now everyone who watches CNN also knows about him. What is their goal here? What do you think, Cenk?
So that's the right question, because one of them said, oh, he's a very small subset of people who watch him, he's not important. And then Donnie was telling him a good question. Then why'd you write a whole op-ed about him? Why are you obsessed with him? Why do you have Hasan derangement syndrome, right? And so, and then Gottheimer then turns around and says, oh, he's huge and he's affecting millions of people. Which one is it? And so the reality is they're trying to use him for their own purposes. And what is that purpose? The purpose is, if you talk to anyone who criticizes Israel harshly, as Hasan does, you shouldn't be able to associate with him. They're trying to make anyone who criticizes Israel toxic so that they get canceled. And the people and the candidates they talk to then also get canceled by association. So this is a trick as old as time. The establishment has been doing it forever and ever. And so in this case, if you watch the CNN documentary on it, you go, well, okay, they at least gave Hasan's point of view and they at least let David Hogg and Hasan address some of those points. But the framing had two giant issues, Yaz. One was they framed it as, is this going to hurt the Democratic Party? Okay, I would ask back, when did you stop beating your wife? If I frame the question in an unanswerable way or one that advantages one side, then the it doesn't really matter what they say inside the documentary, because why aren't we having a conversation about, wait, doesn't it hurt the Democratic Party to support establishment corporate Democrats like Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris that keep losing to Donald Trump? That would be a very rational conversation, because they already lost to the moron Donald Trump twice. But they don't want that conversation, so instead they pivot your frame to, oh, if you support these candidates that were, or these individuals were calling radical, then is it going to hurt the Democratic Party? No, the framing is totally biased to begin with. And why don't you ask the question, is it going to help the Democratic Party? Well, Jen, can you really say that with the positions they have? Well, the number one issue we're talking about here throughout that CNN piece was Israel. 60% of the country is against Israel, and that number grows every single day. So what kind of logic says, could you be hurting the Democratic Party by backing 2/3 of American voters? Well, that question makes no sense. Could you be helping the Democratic Party by agreeing with 2/3 of American voters? Yes, right? And then of course the second trick in that framing is the entire conversation is about whether Hasan hates Jews, and well, but that he never said that. Nobody ever said that. We're saying that there's an issue with Israel, and then Gottheimer's like, oh, nobody knows the answer. They just said they see something on TikTok. No, we have the answer. 86% of genocide scholars say that it's a genocide. By the way, that's what they saw on TikTok. Israel murdering babies and starving them to death, and all of Gaza being obliterated, but Gottheimer doesn't want you to see that. He only wants you to see the establishment propaganda where Israel's the victim and they just had to murder 23,000 children. No, nobody said Jews except Gottheimer, except a deeply racist, bigoted Jonathan Greenblatt from ADL, who was also quoted in that piece repeatedly. Those people are bigots who think that murdering Palestinians is no big deal, slaughtering 23,000 children is no big deal, but if you oppose Israel, anti-Semite. And they get CNN to repeat that charge and that question, I don't know, about a dozen times in that hour-long piece. So the trick is in the framing. So at the end of the day, these guys claim that Hasan represents, they make it seem like he represents the whole Democratic Party. That's obviously not true, whether you agree or disagree with him. And that he's somehow going to hurt the Democratic Party by having some positions, yes, that are unpopular, but they barely even talked about those in the piece. Those are the more radical economic positions. But that he's going to somehow hurt the party by having incredibly popular positions like Medicare for all that polls at 70%, paid family leave is at 84%. And these are supposed to be core Democratic issues like universal health care and yes, defunding Israel. Now a very, very popular position, and obviously the next CNN special I'm sure he has is going to be, is Josh Gottheimer and the dumbasses in the establishment Democratic camp hurting the Democratic Party by constantly losing to Republicans and having deeply unpopular radical positions like supporting Israel's genocide.
Yeah, I mean, that really is what this comes down to, is the American people's stance on Israel. And apparently the shift away from supporting Israel for most Americans, apparently that's all Hasan Piker's fault. We just listen to whatever he tells us and we're like, I guess he's the leader of our party now, you know? And these Democrats who are in this documentary, they kind of just say whatever they want. They're no better than Republicans in that way, and they're always complaining about the Republicans. But anyway, Hasan Piker, he has made his share of controversial statements, right? And they kind of did bring those up. So during the interview, he stood by his claim that Hamas is 1,000 times better than Israel, but he also was very clear that he is not anti-Semitic and he won't tolerate it. So let's watch that.
Do you understand when just the regular American,
of course, that's the reason
when they see all this?
Well, that's the purpose of that document. The purpose of that document is not to be like, this guy has spent the last 13 years combating far-right anti-Semitism and far-right radicalization and still continues to do so to this day. As someone who's an anti-fascist, I'm going to oppose Zionism, which is a fascist ideology. These guys can't defend that, so they have to attack its prominent critics.
I will always always call out anti-Semitism. It's gross, it's immoral, it is a hate crime. There is no space for anti-Semitism.
Yeah, Hasan Piker, he also made a prediction that might ruffle some feathers in the DC establishment. So let's listen to that.
Will you endorse the 2028 candidate if they are pro-Israel in a way that you don't like? If you ultimately are about defeating fascism in this country as you describe it, surely shouldn't you get on board with whoever the main candidate is?
Luckily, I don't think I will have to make that calculation at all, because there is 0% chance that whoever the elected Democrat is that wins the primary will be pro-Israel in any way, shape, or form. You'll see.
Okay, last thing, Cenk. Scott Jennings had something to say about all this. He posted this on X. He said, Hasan Piker speaks the truth. The #1 plank of the Democratic Party platform is and will be anti-Semitism above everything else. So, yeah.
So no, I love the Scott Jennings attitude. Yeah, keep talking about how you live inside Israel's ass and try to win a national election. See how that turns out. Oh, we love Israel more than anything. We love their genocide. We love the wars they make us fight. We love when they kill all those children. We love taking your money. Give me your money. Give me your money. I'm going to send it to Israel. Please, Scott, run the Republican Party election on that and the presidential election. I'm begging you. Okay. So last things here. Look, Hasan says 1,000 times better. I wouldn't phrase it that way, but is Israel's actions 70 times worse than Hamas? Well, that's an empirical fact. They've killed at least 70 times the civilians. And they obviously did it on purpose. American doctors saying sniper shots on children under the age of 5, headshots, chest shots. They raped detainees. They've starved children to death. And they killed way more civilians, 70 times the civilians. And their civilian kill ratio showing intent is way worse than Hamas's. Hamas is 67%. IDF is 83% of the people that they kill are civilians. They're obviously doing it on purpose. They're obviously terrorists. And these dumbasses in the Democratic and Republican establishment claim, no, if we support the murdering terrorists, that is a really popular position. Well, even if you thought that in your deranged mind, the polling indicates it is not. 2/3 of the country is against it. But you see how the media in mass makes it seem like it's the exact opposite? And on the last question that Donnie asked, I would reverse it. He says, if somebody pro-Israel, will you still vote for the Democrat? That's like a way to shame you, right? Like, oh, just because somebody's pro-genocide or pro-Hitler, what, you're gonna just defy the Democratic Party just because they support the Nazis? How do you sound like you're a radical, right? Well, no, that if you're gonna oppose a party on one issue, genocide would be a good one, right? Would be a solid one. And then secondly, do you ever reverse the question? Do you ever ask Josh Shapiro, Josh Gottheimer, and all the people that you asked, well, if the Democrats have a person who does not want to fund Israel anymore, will you support the Democratic nominee? And so you know what the answer is. All of them will be like, no, Israel above the Democratic Party and our stupid voters. Good, then get out. That's why God made doors. Go, leave. We don't want you. So these corporate and foreign government Democrats, all they do is weigh us down. They're an albatross around their neck, advertising to the whole world. Remember, Democrats are corrupt. We will serve any donors that bribe us. No. I would rather not have your votes and have a much cleaner brand that the whole country can rally around instead of being dragged down by these deeply, deeply corrupt Democrats. But they're never gonna reverse that question, and that's what's so frustrating about it. But at the end of the day, yes, none of that matters, because what matters is the voters. So they can cry all day long at CNN and why don't they support Israel anymore? Well, kiss our ass. No, we don't support endless wars and genocides. I know that deeply bothers everyone in mainstream media and almost everyone in Congress, but it's a sad day for you. The American people are much more moral than anyone on cable news or anyone in Congress. And Democratic voters are even more moral. 80% are against it. I don't know when it's gonna get through their thick heads. You lost. And the idea that last comment that Haas made is controversial is hilarious. He said there's a 0% chance that someone who supports Israel is going to win the Democratic nomination. Well, I should hope so. 80% of Democratic voters are in that camp. Why would they pick someone that's in the camp of only the 20 instead of the 80%, right? But in Washington, they're like, how dare these insolent Democratic voters? They should be punished for their opinions. The Democrats will support Israel whether the voters like it or not. Otherwise, you're all anti-Semites. Okay, call us anything you like. But we're not interested in your stupid opinions. We're gonna vote the way that we want. We're gonna vote against genocide, and we're gonna vote for a decent and moral America.
Yeah, and I think that anti-Semite label that they try to put on people who do not support the war in Palestine and Gaza and all those places, everywhere that Israel is doing what they're doing, it doesn't do anything to us because we know that we're not anti-Semitic, so it doesn't hit in any kind of way. But I mean, they're looking at what's happening across the country. How many tens of millions of dollars have gone into the race in Wisconsin, or against Abdul El-Sayed, Michigan? Thank you. How much money has gone from AIPAC straight into Haley Stevens' campaign? It's sad that they have to spend that much money just to unseat someone who says that she dreams of Israel, that Israel comes to her while she's sleeping in her dreams, and she's like, I gotta support Israel, and I'm gonna go to American Congress, and I'm going to support Israel and do everything I can to support Israel while I'm in American Congress. And the American people hear that and we're like, that doesn't sound good to me. That's it. That's it. We see what's going on in New York City with Zohran Mamdani, and we're all like, why can't we have some of that here? They try so hard to villainize and demonize Zohran Mamdani. He even came out and said that he would try to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu, and the backlash he got came from like CNN, not from the actual people. The actual people were like, yeah, probably we should arrest him. Something should probably happen to this guy who's actively committing genocide and does have an arrest warrant out for him from the ICC. Yeah. They're picking on Hasan Piker because he's an easy target. He's very outspoken. He's very popular. He dresses well, but he's also brown and he's also a Muslim. And so he's very easy to like demonize, but he doesn't come in like a scary package. So they don't know what to do with someone like Hasan Piker. He's also young, he's a millennial, and that seems to scare them because everyone who's in the Democratic Party in Congress is like 70 and up, God forbid we have someone actually speaking for the youth, for millennials and Gen Z. But that's really what they're afraid of. And they can't fight 80% of people against Israel, but that really is what this comes down to.
Yep, but the good news to end on is that it's totally counterproductive. When Hasan campaigned with Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan, Abdul was polling at number 3. The establishment media attacked Abdul and said, how dare you talk to Hasan? He's anti-Israel. Abdul then shot up to number 1. That election is tomorrow. Make sure if you're in Michigan, you're voting. You could vote today too. Early voting has begun. And if you know anyone, friends or family in Michigan, make sure to let them know to vote because that election is America versus Israel. Abdul El-Sayed represents America and we need that win badly. And I think we're gonna get it, and I think it's gonna shock the establishment to their core, and they're all gonna cry about it, and I can't wait to cover it, which we will on the Young Turks tomorrow. So make sure you're checking out the election coverage tomorrow at 8 o'clock Eastern. We'll be right back.
This guy, Hasan Piker.
All right, let's go to Twitch. TYT for me says, don't worry, Cenk. If Maher's ratings sink even lower, he'll be calling you, Hasan, and Crystal and others to help him save him from the cancellation abyss. Just saying. No, I don't think there's any force on earth that'll get Bill Maher to put me on his show. Like he'll have Hasan on before me, Crystal. He'll have anybody on but me. He's not going to do it because number one, he's a disgusting racist. And so he's like, oh, ew, Muslim. Blah, you were originally Muslim. Oh, you don't love Israel. Ew, 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 right? And plus, he knows I would obliterate him. And so he doesn't want any piece of that at all. He's likes to bring on like dummy Muslims who are like, oh yeah, all the Muslims they're evil problems. You're right, Bill. I'm your Muslim friend. Israel's awesome. Okay, it's not gonna bring on anybody real. And when Anna was on, he was so desperate not to talk about that topic. Anyways, Mr. Zeman5 on YouTube member section says, I hope Tucker and all of them start up a new independent party. I'd vote for them. Interesting. Larry Woods 2397 says, I'm actively trying to recruit him to run for president. Every weekend I carry a sign in downtown Cartersville, Georgia that says Tucker Carlson for president. So there's a lot of different interesting opinions there. Intruder Alert 007 says, Maher, who the F is he? Yeah, good question. Somebody should ask.
Carlson, a terrible friend.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Yaz with you guys. So you can check out Yaz on Rebel HQ as well. Make sure you do that. Now we got time for one more story. Christians in Jerusalem, unfortunately, are being spit upon, and at a greater rate than they have been in the past. And some folks there, not all, but some, are trying to humiliate Christians as idol worshipers, and they say that we're supposed to hate them. Wow, that's interesting. And where did this story come from? The Wall Street Journal. That's also interesting. Yeah, tell us all about it.
Yeah, so basically, anti-Christian hate amongst Israeli Jews, it's really nothing new, but it is getting worse. And it's getting worse, particularly among the younger generation, okay? And while it is the younger generation, there are some elders who are also encouraging this behavior, or at least they're not stopping it. So for example, in 2013, a Protestant cemetery in Jerusalem was desecrated. And then 2 years later, there was an arson at a monastery at another sacred location. And after the arson, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is Israel's far-right national security minister, he decided to be the defense lawyer for the arsonist. And he said that spitting on Christians is an ancient Jewish custom and should not be considered a crime. That was his actual argument. So Yiska Harani, she's an Israeli scholar, and they said there's an organization called, where's the organization? Well, a lot of anti-Christian sentiment has been increasing in Jerusalem specifically. And as of this point in 2026, 107 anti-Christian incidents have been recorded and documented by her organization, which is more than twice as many from the first half of 2024. So in the past 3 years, it has gone up since they started recording all this stuff. And you might suspect that this is specifically against Palestinian Arabs, but it's actually not. So the overwhelming majority of Christians who live in Jerusalem are Palestinian Arabs, but much of the anti-Christian behavior targets foreign clerics, nuns, and the city's overtly Christian symbols, according to victims and rights groups that monitor such incidents. So there's all kinds of things that have been happening. Churches have had trash thrown at them. Also, people have been urinating on the churches. There was also an incident where there was graffiti on the side of a church that said death to Christians and Arabs. Also, a French nun was thrown down and she suffered a head injury from that. Now, a lot of nuns are afraid to just go outside at all unless they're being escorted by someone. So the question now is, why has there been a rise in anti-Christian hate, specifically in Jerusalem? And there's a few different theories as to why that could be. So some think that the Jewish people are just ill-informed about Christianity, and they see, the way that they practice Christianity as a form of idolatry, which they do not condone. And they equate modern Christians to the Christians that were persecuting the Jews back during World War II and the Holocaust. And what is probably the biggest reason, the actual reason as to why there's an increase in anti-Christian sentiment among the Jewish people in Israel, is that they're very outspoken against the genocide that's happening in Gaza. The Christians, as well as the Catholic Church, has been very outspoken against the state of Israel. And whatever the reason for all the hate, the Jewish youth specifically, they're not hiding any of it. So some Jewish extremists say that they want Jerusalem's churches destroyed or converted into synagogues. Among them is 19-year-old Atara Sarwatian. She says it should be a Jewish state. And there's also been hostility towards Christian images that was on display during the recent war in Lebanon, where an Israeli soldier used a sledgehammer to smash a statue of Jesus. So right now, about 50% of Israelis believe that it is forbidden to even enter a church at all, and that is up from 10% in 2008. But here's the other thing, where does our government sit in all of this? Because we have a lot of evangelical Christians who are huge supporters of the state of Israel. Well, anti-Christian behavior has tested the support of Israel's staunchest allies in the US. When Mike Huckabee took over as a US ambassador to Israel last year, he was shocked to discover that evangelical Christian organizations were struggling to obtain visas. A strong supporter of Israel, Huckabee ran a tour company that brought thousands of Christian pilgrims to Israel and the West Bank and never had problems. Huckabee had to go all the way up to Benjamin Netanyahu to get these visas released. So that's what's going on there. The spitting, I feel, Jake, like when he said that, it could have been taken metaphorically. No, they're literally spitting on Christians now in Jerusalem.
It's amazing. I just talked to Mother Agapia at the end of last week, and she explained Christians are afraid to go out at night because they're constantly being attacked. And it's amazing that this is in the Wall Street Journal. They explained that sometimes the younger people are chanting death to Christians. And I'm gonna give you one last quote from the piece. They say, Father Vazgen Alakian is an Armenian priest who has been based in Jerusalem since the late 1990s. Security cameras positioned outside the door of his church once caught someone peeing inside a niche near the entrance. On another occasion, graffiti saying death to Christians and Arabs was scrawled on a wall. This is super extreme stuff. And so do all Israelis think this? Of course not, right? And this is about Israel, guys. This is not about Jewish Americans. I don't know any Jewish American that believes any of this stuff, right? I'm sure some tiny, tiny number could exist, but overall, you almost never see that here in America. But in Israel, what's happening, Yaz, is that we've lost touch with what's going on there. So there's this mythology in America about what Israel is, that it's a secular country and they're all on kibbutzes and they're all having picnics and not harming anyone, and every once in a while they have to do self-defense. No, that country has become radicalized. And so, again, this is not everybody in Israel, but there is now a very significant percentage inside Israel that views that they have a mandate from God, that this land was given to them, and whoever's on the land, whether they're Christians or Muslims, have to be removed. God told them that it's only Jewish land, and if you're not Jewish, that they're going to harass you and assault you until you leave. And so that is what the settlers are doing in the West Bank. That's including in Bethlehem, and that's what they're doing in Jerusalem. And so this is way more extreme than the people here in America realize. And I think that we've lost that country. And so I hope that they can get back to sanity, get back to being secular and drop this lunatic religious extremism. But for us to fund those religious extremists is crazy. We would never, I hope we would never fund radical Muslim terrorists or extremists or Christian extremists or terrorists. And I have no idea why we're all being forced to fund radical Zionist extremists and terrorists that are terrorizing not just Muslims, but Christians. It makes no sense at all. So I do appreciate the good journalism from Wall Street Journal to bring this to light, though. And we always give credit where credit is due. All right, we're out of time here. Yaz, thanks so much for doing this hour with us. We appreciate it. Everybody check out Rebel HQ for more Yaz videos. And when I come back, I'm gonna do the revolution, and I'm gonna do a story about the DNC autopsy. Turns out they left out a critical chapter. What was in that chapter? I'll tell you. Revolution. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur. So there's a lot of folks who think that we need a political revolution. In fact, some on the right wing have kind of abandoned the Republican Party. We talked about that a little bit on the show earlier today. We're going to talk a lot more about it with Joe Kent tomorrow when he joins us at 6 o'clock Eastern. And certainly there needs to be a revolt within the Democratic Party, and that's what I want to talk to you guys about right now. So the Democrats did an autopsy to find out what happened in 2024 and what went wrong, and then they decided, oh no, we don't want to show that to people. It turns out it was our fault. To which I say, of course, whose fault did you think it was? So, but finally, after a lot of pressure, they released it in May. But did they? It turns out, no, they left out a chapter. What's in that chapter? Well, I'm going to tell you. So the person who's the head of the DNC right now is Ken Martin. He asked his friend or former friend, I don't know if they still are, because they're now going back and forth, giving different sides of the story. He gave his friend Paul Rivera the job of doing this autopsy. Now look, it was ill-conceived in the first place because he was doing it part-time unpaid, so he's kind of doing it off the side of his desk. It's a very important project to be doing it that way. And then the second problem that came about was a DNC kept saying, all right, give us the unfinished manuscript, give us the unfinished parts. So he would send them parts and pieces, and then it became a mess. Finally, he sends them the whole thing, and Rivera says that he sent everything, including this chapter I'm about to tell you about. Now Ken Martin is saying, no, my friend is not telling the truth. I never got that chapter. Well, now it does really make you wonder what's in it. First, let's go to New York Times explaining. The chapter raised pointed questions that were notably absent from the draft that the party put out, both about President Joseph Biden and the ill-fated decision, Joe Biden's ill-fated decision to run for re-election, and the sway of an operative class that has become, quote, generationally wealthy off politics while steering Democratic strategy. Yeah, well, those were critical parts of the problem. In fact, here, let me give you the three things that were featured in the chapter. One was, Biden shouldn't have run for re-election. And they're like, no, get that out of there, get that. Come on, guys, we already know he shouldn't have run for re-election. But isn't that amazing that there's so many Biden loyalists still in the Democratic Party that are like, no, don't say that. Of course he should have run for re-election. You know, the best person to beat Donald Trump is a senile man who can't finish a sentence. But why are they saying that? Because they're part of that consulting class who ran that campaign, who got rich off that campaign. And that's the second part of the chapter. There's a third part, by the way, about how why the Democrats lost key demographics, or at least support within those demographics, not entirely, but certainly critical enough to lose all 7 swing states. And of course, that was Black, Hispanic, Asian Americans, and even Native American groups. They lost momentum in every one of those groups, and it cost them the election. They also didn't want to talk about that. And the reason for that is obvious, because of economic issues. So the Democrats kept saying to all those groups, we're on your side, and yay, your race and group and ethnicity. Yeah, but brother, what are you gonna do for me? Like, okay, I understand that you're claiming that you're on my side and I need to vote for you because I'm on this, because I'm of this ethnicity. But did you actually increase my wages? Did you actually get me health care? Did you materially improve my life in any way? And they're like, shut up and vote for black people, okay? And you remember Barack Obama giving that lecture to younger African American voters saying they needed to support Kamala Harris and they were being sexist. If I'm in that audience, I'm like, bro, you don't know me at all. How do you know I'm being sexist? And what is this? Why am I getting lectured to like this when you're the ones who should be lectured to? You're the ones who never delivered for us. So these are the embarrassing things that the Democrats don't want to talk about. And of course, the third part was the main part, which is how these consultants got so wealthy and that they're so financially secure that they literally don't know anyone who's an average American. And I'll tell you, that's the part that resonates most with me. And I say that in a chapter that has Joe Biden shouldn't have run for re-election. I went and ran as a protest candidate. We did a petition a year before the debate to get him out of the race because we're like, why would you run a senile guy? Are you guys nuts? What do you want to lose to Donald Trump? But that was very poorly received. How dare you? put on your cheerleader outfit and get your pom-poms. And if you cheerlead enough for the guy with dementia, we'll win. No, that propaganda garbage doesn't work. And I don't want to be involved with propaganda. Our job is to tell the truth to our audience. So, okay, but even despite that, the bigger problem is this consultant class that's an albatross around our necks. They're a bigger problem because they're not just about the Biden campaign, they're about every campaign. They also did the same thing once Kamala Harris took over. They did the same thing during Hillary Clinton. They did the same thing for all the so-called moderate Democrats like Claire McCaskill and Joe Donnelly that were in Missouri and Indiana. And they told us over and over again, oh no, support the corporate Democrat, the corrupt Democrat, and they'll win. And they never win. They never win. And still they come back and go, no, if you don't support us, the party will fall apart. So they finally do the autopsy and they find out, oops, it's the exact opposite. Progressives were right all along. The outsiders were right all along. All the wealthy DNC consultants were dead wrong. And so who runs the DNC? It turns out it's not Ken Martin. Ken Martin was a person who was kind of a progressive reformer in Minnesota. He comes to the DNC, the first thing they make him do is get rid of David Hogg. Then the second thing they have him do is bury this autopsy of what went wrong. The third thing they have him do is bury the most important chapter. So who's running the place? And obviously the consultants are still fully in charge and they need to make more money and more money. And now, oh, they're not raising enough, so they're crying, right? So the New York Times points out, and it comes as Mr. Martin has come under fire for his stewardship of a party that recently reported more than $2 million in debt, while the Republican National Committee is 128 million, has 128.5 million in the bank. Okay, yes, that's all good and fine, but why are these stories coming out about Ken Martin now? Well, there's a couple of different reasons. There's pressure from progressives and people opposed to the corporate wing. But secretly, and this the New York Times doesn't write about, it's the same consultants, in my opinion, that are trying to bury Ken Martin. They're like, oh, we're not raising enough money. Now, why do they care so much about that? Because they want to win? No, they don't mind losing at all. They lose all the time. They're professional losers. If you know a Democratic consultant, you don't know anyone more incompetent that you've ever met in your life, okay? Now some do a range of candidates, some represent progressives as well. Obviously, I don't mean them. I'm talking about the 90% that represent establishment Democrats, and all they ever tell them is, oh, tell them how much corporate CEOs like you. Tell them how much you love and will loyally serve a different country, Israel. And tell them about how you're just like the Republicans. That way they won't vote for the Republican, they'll vote for you. Why? If you tell them how great the Republicans are, they'll vote for the Republican, you idiots. But those guys go, no, whoa, I don't mind losing, but we didn't raise enough money. Big percentage of that money goes to the consultants. They go, that goes to me. Raise more money. Take more corporate PAC money, take more AIPAC money, right? That's part of the point of all of this. So, no, the issue isn't that the Democrats didn't raise enough. Guys, Hillary Clinton outraised Donald Trump 2-1. Kamala Harris way outraised Donald Trump even in a short window of time. And did they win? They didn't win. So money equals victories in lower races that don't get any media attention, congressional races, etc. But in a presidential election, at this point, with the amount of attention presidential elections get, money wonderfully has become, especially in the general election, primaries it matters more, but in the general election, it's become nearly irrelevant. The only people who are still obsessed about it are two sets of people: the corrupt Democratic consultants and lobbyists and party officials that run the DNC, that run Democratic leadership, because those consultants usually get 15% of all the ad buys. So the more money you raise, the more money goes straight into their pockets and into their mansions and their yachts. So they don't care that the money is causing losses because the money goes into their pockets. So they are actively going in the wrong direction so they can get rich while we lose. And the second people who are obsessed and love corruption is mainstream media. Why? Where do you think the money in politics goes? The overwhelming majority of that money goes straight into cable news, local television news, radio, and newspapers. So that's yummy in New York Times tummy. And CNN, MS Now, Fox News, Washington Post, they all get rich. Politico, Axios, you name it. They all get rich off of the money in politics and the corruption. That's why every one of their reporters and news anchors go, oh, money in politics, it's no big deal, it's no big deal. And you gotta vote for the corporate Democrats, the establishment Democrats, and you have to be obsessed with raising money, and money in politics is a great thing. We never talk about corruption here. No, corruption is a minor issue, I say. Yeah, you say that because all the corrupt money goes to you. So if you're a Democratic voter out there, do not ever make the mistake of listening to anybody on television telling you how you got to vote for establishment Democrats and incumbents and the deeply corrupt portion of the Democratic Party. Vote for whoever you like. And by the way, these days, outsiders, progressives, populists have a much, much better chance of winning. In fact, the reason why a lot of the Democratic Party is crying now is they're like, oh no, these progressives keep winning elections. But wait a minute, I thought the point was to win elections. They're so deeply corrupt that they're literally crying over Democrats winning elections. That's how sick Democratic leadership and cable news is. So don't believe the hype. Go participate in the primary process. Vote for clean candidates that are outsiders, populists, who are actually going to look out for you instead of the donor class. All right, that's your revolution for today. But stay right here. I got a bonus episode for you guys. I'm going to talk a little bit more revolution. I'm going to interact with you guys and write in if you got a question for me, and I'm going to read some of the comments from the show as well. So for members, if you're not a member, hit the join button below on YouTube or tyt.com/join. And if you are a member, stay right here.
Tucker Carlson.